Hello and welcome. I'm Geeta Mohan and you're watching World Today. Our main focus this week is former US President Trump's indictment proceedings. In a first for any former or sitting president of the United States of America, Trump has been indicted in a US federal court. He faces serious charges under the Espionage Act that prohibits the retention of classified materials, a statute that prohibits the obstruction of an official proceeding, a statute that prohibits falsifying or destroying records pertinent to a federal investigation, and certain statutes prohibiting false statements and conspiracy. While for now the court has not laid down specific terms of travel limitations and Trump was permitted to leave court without a financial bond, the stage is set for a legal battle that will probably take place over the coming months as he makes his bid for the presidential race in November 2024.
What a great group of people. What a great group.
On the day that Trump celebrated his 77th birthday at a Cuban restaurant, he also appeared in a Miami court pleading not guilty to 37 felony charges for unlawfully keeping national security documents when he left office and lying to officials who sought to recover them.
Some birthday. We got a government that's out of control.
Trump's plea entered before U.S. Magistrate Judge Aileen Mercedes Cannon in a federal court in Miami, setting up a legal battle likely to play out over coming months as he campaigns to win back the presidency in November 2024 elections. Experts say it could be a year or more before a trial takes place. The case stems from the former president's alleged retention of sensitive national security documents at his residence in Florida and his alleged efforts to impede authorities' attempts to retrieve them. But a defiant Trump maintains he did nothing wrong.
In other words, whatever documents a president decides to take with him, he has the right to do so. It's an absolute right. This is the law. And that is something that people have now seen, and it couldn't be more clear. They ought to drop this case immediately because they're destroying the country.
Presiding over President Trump's first court appearance on federal criminal charges was Jonathan Goodman, a magistrate court who is not expected to remain involved in the case. The trial will be overseen by Judge Aileen Cannon, a Trump appointee who has issued favorable rulings to Mr. Trump in the past and was randomly assigned to the case. Many have raised concerns about conflict of interest here.
Interestingly, the federal criminal charges against Donald Trump have done little to change Americans' views of the former president.
He's the best president we ever had. Trump fought the law, but we know Trump won.
Based on an opinion poll which showed him maintaining a commanding lead in the race for the Republican presidential nomination. Meanwhile, Trump has vowed to pay the ruling dispensation in the same coin should he return to power in 2024.
I will appoint a real special prosecutor to go after the most corrupt president in the history of the United States of America, Joe Biden, and the entire Biden crime family. Name a special prosecutor. And all others involved with the destruction of our elections, our borders, and our country itself. They're destroying our country. And when I'm reelected, and we will get reelected, we have no choice. We're not going to have a country anymore. I will totally obliterate the deep state. We will obliterate the deep state.
The trial could be a long-drawn process, and if Trump wins the November 2024 election, it is unlikely that the prosecution would proceed with the case. The U.S. Justice Department has a decade-old policy that a sitting president cannot be prosecuted. The bigger question, will Trump use presidential pardon for himself should he return to office?
Trump is the first former president to face federal charges and was arrested and booked alongside his aide and co-defendant Walt Nauta. Nauta, who works as an aide to Trump, faces 6 counts, including several obstruction and concealment-related charges. This indictment comes just months after Trump was charged by a Manhattan grand jury in a separate hush money case. If Trump gets convicted, he can still stand for the elections of 2024. The only way a US president can be disqualified is by way of impeachment.
Trump has been indicted, first ever sitting or former US president to be indicted in a federal court. On Spotlight this weekend, I'm being joined by James Sample, who is a professor of constitutional law from Hofstra University. Thank you so much, James, for joining us here on World Today.
Thank you, Geeta.
James, you live in interesting times. I'm sure you've never experienced or seen the kind of cases that you're reading into, looking into. Explain to us, to begin with, what does this indictment mean for Donald Trump, and is it going to spill over into his primary race, and then, if at all he wins the primaries, the presidential race?
Two very good questions, Geeta. The indictment of the former president here is on a very serious set of matters. He is charged with 37 counts of federal criminal charges. Now, he was just 2 months ago the first ever former president in the United States to be ever criminally indicted when he was charged on state charges in New York arising out of his affair with an adult film star and then writing off the payments that he made to her as though they were attorney's fees. In this matter, he is charged with maintaining and holding on to classified documents that he had access to when he was the president, but after he was no longer president, he took them to his beach property in Mar-a-Lago, Florida. He moved them around, the documents around. He left them in ballrooms, in bathrooms that were well trafficked by visitors to this resort property that he has down there. He is apparently, according to the indictment, got a number of his staff members who have cooperated against him. The FBI found all of these documents. There's a lot of physical evidence. Right. And he's charged also with conspiring to obstruct the investigation of federal officials into his holding on to these documents when he told the government through his attorneys and otherwise that he had returned all of the documents that he had inadvertently perhaps taken, when in fact he knew that he had not. So he's charged with lying to the federal government. He's charged with obstructing justice. Right. He's charged with very serious crimes.
Right. James, former President Donald Trump is defiant. He says he's done no wrong, that this is the law, and it's absolutely right on whatever he's done. So he remains defiant. He's pleaded not guilty. How is his case different from the cases that he has been spelling out, whether it's Biden, Pence, Hillary Clinton? How is his case far different and graver in terms of the criminality?
A good question. Certainly he and his supporters are saying that this is no different than Joe Biden or Mike Pence or Hillary Clinton inadvertently holding on to documents. But there's a huge, huge difference. When those individuals, all three of them, were discovered in various different respects to have had access or inappropriate storage of files or documents, they immediately cooperated with federal authorities. They immediately secured whatever the materials were. They allowed full access. And in many respects, the cover-up on the part of Donald Trump here is as bad as the crime. He's alleged, on the contrary, to have actually shown secret documents to individuals who are not cleared to see them. And we're talking about things like nuclear secrets, and we're talking about things like battle plans. So to your earlier question, this will be an ongoing issue during his campaign, without a doubt, but I suspect that he's going to try and delay the court proceedings, ideally from his perspective, until after the November 2024 election. Whether or not he can actually win election with all of this hanging over his head, if anyone could do it, it would be Donald Trump. But it is a sad day for America that he may be the Republican frontrunner for the nomination.
Well, that's an ideal scenario for Donald Trump should he be able to push it. But if he's convicted constitutionally, James, will he still be able to run for president, for office? And secondly, if that really happens, what's the process for a sitting president to really be disqualified?
So, believe it or not, in the United States, constitutionally, a convicted felon can be the president. In theory, at least as a matter of law, he could even be the president while serving incarceration, while in a prison cell. He could still be president, which, you know, it's a little bit remarkable. It's the kind of sort of precedent that you don't want to set. It certainly wouldn't look good for America. It certainly wouldn't speak well of America if that were the case. These are federal charges, so he has posited that if he became president, he would use his pardon power to pardon himself. Now, there are state charges, New York and potentially soon Georgia, that he's facing, and the president does not have a pardon power over state criminal charges, so that wouldn't work in that scenario. But it is a fact of American life that although some former felons are not even allowed to vote in some of American elections, there is no bar to a felony convicted individual serving as the president.
Well, that's interesting. The state laws could be different, but even if he's convicted in the federal court, you're saying that even if he's in jail, he will be president if he wins the elections?
Correct. Yes.
And does he have constitutionally the right to pardon himself? Because there are two views over here. Some experts saying that he does not have the right to pardon, to self-pardon, and there are some others who say that constitutionally he can, only, like you said, in case of charges against him from a state, he will not be able to.
He certainly cannot pardon himself for state charges. There's no precedent. For obvious reasons, there's no precedent as to whether he can pardon himself for federal charges. My best analysis, my best speculation about that untested question, the reason it's untested, of course, is we've never had a president who's needed to self-pardon before. And hopefully, in my view, we won't have such a president, and hopefully Donald Trump will not gain election after he's criminally convicted, if in fact he is convicted. But my expectation is that the Supreme Court of the United States, which would have the final say on that matter, would not step in and overturn an exercise of a self-pardon, and they would say that it's a political question that is beyond the scope of the court's jurisdiction.
James, another important question, concern that Democrats have been raising is with the judge. Now, in the first hearing, it was Justice Goodman, but the case will be taken over by another judge, Judge Cannon, and that's certainly somebody who was appointed by Donald Trump himself and has had favorable judgments for Donald Trump. So, is that a concern of the legal fraternity as also the Democrats?
I think that if you're Donald Trump, you're thrilled with the draw of Judge Eileen Cannon. If you're the Department of Justice, if you're the U.S. government prosecuting these charges, you are very concerned about the draw of Judge Cannon. She's not just a Trump appointee. She's someone who was appointed by Trump after he lost the election. She's very inexperienced. She's got almost no criminal trial experience, much less on a matter of the complexity of prosecuting a former president. And as you mentioned, Geeta, in an earlier iteration of the backstory that gives rise to all of the documents context that we're now discussing, she issued a stunningly incompetent and incorrect ruling, incorrect on so many levels that she was reversed unanimously and completely and on a wholesale basis by the very conservative 11th Circuit of the United States Court of Appeals, including by some very conservative judges on that court. She is, without a doubt, somebody who the Trump administration could, or in the Trump allies could not be happier to be before, and she'll have a lot of power here, power over things like the timing of the case, evidentiary rulings, and it'll be interesting to see whether the Department of Justice pursues a strategy seeking to recuse Judge Eileen Cannon. I suspect that she will choose to remain on the case, and oddly, in the United States, most of the time, judges make that decision for themselves.
Okay, and finally, before I let you go, a lot of conversation revolving the trial. Should there be a trial, the jury in question in Miami, as also if there's a trial that's moved to another state or a trial held in another state. Could you explain to us what this entire controversy or the discussion is with regards to a trial?
I mean, I think that the Department of Justice has made a choice to file this case in federal court in Florida, South Florida, and in a lot of respects that makes sense. That it is a proper venue given the fact that that's where the documents by and large were discovered. That's where the events underlying this case, the obstruction took place, the moving around of the documents. It's where the evidence is. So it makes sense legally to try this case in Florida, but the jury pool, even in federal court, which draws from a larger geographic area than some state court juries would, the jury pool will consist of Floridians. And Donald Trump is, in many respects, on his home turf there. He won rather decisively in both 2016 and 2020 in the state of Florida. And one of the things about an American jury trial is you only need, if you're the defendant, 1 out of 12 jurors to vote to acquit. And the prosecutors, on the other hand, have to get a unanimous verdict. So if Donald Trump can get one staunch ally who refuses to believe that he could ever do wrong, who votes to acquit, he can end up avoiding conviction in this case.
Right, and before I let you go, just finally, because I heard you say it earlier that this is the rule of law and people who have indulged in such crimes should be held accountable. But do you think over here Trump does have an advantage, or do you think that he will be held accountable? How do you see it play out?
It's a good question. And rather than speculating on what the result will be, I will simply say that I believe that the steps that have been taken to hold him accountable are steps that already represent at least some form of a victory for the rule of law and the principle that even the president can be held accountable and is subject to the rule of law. If anyone else who had ever done these things and had done the things that Donald Trump is accused of doing, they would be held to account. To choose not to prosecute somebody just because they used to be the president is to indulge a form of government that is anti-democratic in every way, by which I mean there's America fought a revolution against Great Britain back in the day when the theory was the king could do no wrong. This is Donald Trump being held to account.
Right. On that note, James Sample, thank you so much for joining us here on World Today.
Thank you.
NATO countries are in the middle of Arctic military maneuvers, vowing to defend their newest member, Finland, after it became the 31st member of the Western Alliance in April. Here is an in-depth report on the 2-week Air Defender 2023 drill, one of the largest in NATO's history, aimed at demonstrating the alliance's defensive capabilities and enhancing coordination among member countries owing to Russian aggression and increased Russian assertion in the region. What do these war games mean for the Western Alliance, and what do they mean for Russia?
After 6 years of careful planning, NATO officially launched its 2023 Air Defender military exercise in Germany on June 12th. 23 NATO countries, including newest member Finland, are participating along with Japan as an observer. After NATO began talks with Tokyo to establish the bloc's first liaison base in Asia to counter China. Allied Air Force began the largest deployment exercise in NATO's history. 25 nations are taking part in the 2 weeks long Air Defender exercise with around 10,000 personnel and 250 aircraft.
With Air Defender 2023, we show, we prove, and we demonstrate the defense capability of this alliance. This exercise is not directed against anyone. It is a signal to us, directed inwards to NATO. It is predominantly NATO countries that are participating in this exercise, which is German-led, that we are capable of defending this country and this alliance.
The United States alone has sent 2,000 personnel and about 100 aircraft to take part in the training maneuvers, which will conclude on the 23rd of June.
The U.S. Army is here training to, with our newest NATO ally to build that capability to help defend Finland if anything happens.
These exercises test the capabilities of participating Air Force and provide an opportunity for joint training and information sharing. The geopolitical context surrounding this exercise cannot be ignored. With ongoing tensions between NATO and Russia, the drill serves as a show of deterrence and reassurance to NATO member countries.
The Air Defender 23 exercise once again reflects the need for the United States to further improve its anti-Russian strategic layout through the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The scenario set in this exercise is that NATO members will have to work together to respond to an attack.
NATO territory includes 5 members participating in the exercises that share a border with Russia: Norway, Finland, Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania. 2 of those, Estonia and Latvia, will host small portions of the drills. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which was formed in the aftermath of World War II to defend Western nations from the Soviet Union, contains a mutual defense clause where an attack on any one member is considered an attack on all.
An enormous anti-government march took place in Poland's capital, Warsaw, with citizens traveling from across the country to voice their anger at a right-wing administration that has eroded democratic norms and created fears that the nation is following Hungary and Turkey down the path to autocracy. The local government in Warsaw estimated that 500,000 people joined the march, which was led by the opposition party. Critics accused the government of violating the constitution and eroding fundamental rights in Poland. Supporters of the march have warned that the election might be the nation's last chance to stop the erosion of democracy under the ruling party, Law and Justice, amid growing fears that the fall election might not be fair. Meanwhile, the top European Union court struck down more elements of Poland's sweeping judicial overhaul for violating the bloc's democracy tenets, adding to pressure on the ruling Law and Justice party, which faces an election this autumn. The European Court of Justice said that publishing online declarations of judges' memberships of associations, non-profit foundations or political parties violated their right to privacy and could be used to sway them. That's all in this edition of World Today. But before I go, some good news. Transformers: Rise of the Beasts, the latest sequel in the franchise, will usher in a bigger and wider universe for its audience, said the movie's director, Stephen Caple Jr. As the first 5 films of the series were directed by Michael Bay, the latest sequel, released on June 9th, is the first live-action version of Transformers series directed by Caple. The director said he hopes to create a vaster universe in the series through the new film. Take care and goodbye.